Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you can hear me clearly. So what I'm going to be taking you through is all the hard work that all these agencies of government have been working on. And I'm going to try and share what it actually means from a scoring and a ranking perspective. So I'm going to go straight into it. Before I go and talk about the actual scenarios, there's a big disclaimer that I need to put out there. So the World Bank's Doing Business survey is the only verified source of the results. That's published by the Doing Business team. This Doing Business 2021 report has not yet been published. So what we're going to be doing is I have access to the Doing Business score calculator, which is a spreadsheet, and I'm merely using it as a tool to conduct some what-if scenarios to calculate the score of South Africa's reforms. Also, we need to take note that the score calculator doesn't take into account any other reforms that might have been recognized yet by the Doing Business team for the other 189, 190 countries. So in other words, the calculation is done in isolation of the other countries' reforms. So the first one is really about starting a business, which Commissioner Rory Follow was talking about earlier on, and the reforms that the CIPC has made in conjunction with the UIF Compensation Fund, SARS, the Department of Home Affairs, and other agencies. So initially, there were 7 procedures that were noted by the World Bank, and it also took around 40 days to start a business. You may also notice that there are time in days for men and there's time in days for women. And now this has nothing much to do about, it doesn't really affect us in South Africa, but it does affect other countries like in the Middle East, where women, for example, would have to go to their husbands to ask for permission to register a business. So therefore, it's separate and distinct in this measure. So what you might notice is that we have been sitting at 139 out of the 190 countries, and the score though is sitting at 81.2%. So although South Africa is an A student, scoring 81.2%, it's still quite lagging behind in terms of where it should be placed in terms of the ranking. Now, with the introduction of Biz Portal over the last year and a half, what this has actually meant is that the number of procedures were reduced from 7 to 5 procedures. And we're being conservative here to say, we are reducing 5 days. But like Commissioner Follow was saying, that you can actually start a business in, 10 minutes, essentially. And that's how long it actually takes. But there are other steps that takes a little bit longer. So what does this actually mean? It means that if the other countries do not make any reforms, and the World Bank recognizes us for Doing Business 21, we will move from a ranking of 139 to 113. Now, we're also, trying to figure out what should have been recognized if the confirmations, if we got all the relevant confirmations from the private sector. So in other words, all the entrepreneurs, the accountants, the lawyers, all the professionals who have used the system, if they were able to validate and say that, it was reduced from 7 procedures to 4 procedures, you were able to open a bank account, you were in the same process, you were able to obtain your VAT, your tax registration. All of that was done fairly fast, and it reduced the number of steps. Then we should, in theory, be number 29 in the world. That's if we had the confirmations from the private sector. So the message that I'm trying to get across to you is, whilst the government is making all these reforms, the private sector has to recognize these reforms and have to put it out there in the World Bank survey as well, that they have recognized it. Otherwise, it just wouldn't be recognized. Now, what can be achieved in the next year or so? What really can be achieved is that we can reduce procedures, right? I swapped these things around. I made a mistake here, but either way it works out. If we have 2 procedures and it takes 1.5 days, then we can rank number 3 in the world. And I believe that's very much doable in South Africa if we continue to work, with agency to agency, like CIPC, working very closely with SARS, working very closely with the Department of Labor, UIF, Compensation Fund, and the Department of Home Affairs. All of this can be reduced to just 2 procedures done in less than 1.5 days. So I'm going to move on to the next indicator, which is dealing with construction permits. Previously it was recognized as being number 98 in the world. And as you can see, it takes 20 procedures, the turnaround time being 155 days, the cost of the warehouse in the case study is 1.9, and the building quality control index of 12. So what does all of this actually mean? It means if the World Bank recognizes the reforms, right, it should rank us number 66. And again, the big disclaimer, provided that nothing else in the world actually moves. So if the private sector, in other words, the architects and the engineers, had to confirm all the reforms that Amalemo Motogai from COJ was talking about, then the procedures would be reduced from 20 to just 13, and the time from 155 days to 85 days. And then that would mean we would end up being number 23 in the world. And that's if we have all the private sector confirmations. Now, what we have heard is private sector has not recognized all of these. So therefore, it won't be in the DB21 results. Now, what can happen is if we implement the system, like what Amalemo was saying, is the IFC has given City of Joburg a construction permitting system, and it's currently being configured. But if COJ implements this with the reduced number of procedures, so down to 8 procedures, and they have a turnaround time of 35 days, and improve the quality control index by just 1, they can be number 2 in the world. In fact, they can also be number 1 in the world if they reduce the procedures further. And Amalemo did mention that they're also looking at site development plans and how they can actually reduce that further. So the message is that South Africa can do quite well if they digitize and reduce and optimize their procedures before digitizing, actually. For registering property, what's been recognized, this is one of the most difficult indicators to work with. So currently there's 7 procedures, and that hasn't changed at all. The time previously was 23 days, and the quality of land administration index was 15.5. So we were ranking at 108, but the results, if we I've done the simulation, we actually end up being just 3 points better, 205. But if the private sector recognized all the other turnaround times, especially around with the deeds office and the rates clearance office, then we would rank 104. Now, this is not, in line with what the president of South Africa wants to. He wants all of the indicators to be in the top 50. So with the introduction of the electronic deeds registration system that Jabu was talking about, when this is implemented in the next, hopefully in the next 2 years, 3 years, then we should be able to reduce the procedures from 7 down to perhaps 2, and the time in days to about 3 to 4 days. And then we will see a significant dent in our ranking. The last one that I'm going to talk about is on paying taxes, and you've heard from Dr. Rabona and Mark Keenan on the reforms that they've been making. So the reforms that have been made was significantly around the time to comply with VAT refund hours and the time to obtain the VAT refund in weeks. So you can see here it was 9 and it was brought down to 1. And this is just the ease of doing business, where the chartered accountants or the professional accountants or tax professionals would actually take the time to comply and to be able to upload these. So SARS has made significant changes on their systems and made it easier to do business from a tax perspective. When you look at the refunds, it used to be a very long time. It was recorded as 15 weeks, and it's now dropped in the last, well, year before last, to 5 weeks. And it's even dropping further in a way beyond the 21 days, like Dr. Rabona was speaking about. So if all these reforms and turnaround times are accepted by the World Bank, we would move from 54 to 48. And if the private sector were to recognize all of it to the way that SARS has recognized it, then we should be ranking number 24. The case study that the World Bank uses is pretty narrow. So, you know, it talks about a business starting in the first year and it makes 125 million. I mean, we all know that, you know, if we start our business this year, we're not going to be making 125 million rands in the first year and 85 million in the third year and so on. So it's a case study, and it's difficult to compare it to the South African context. So what can be achieved in the next year or so is that if the private sector is able to show that they can work better, if they can use more better accounting systems, then they can prepare. So the preparation time can come down from 210 hours to 170 hours or lesser, based on the hypothesis and benchmarks that we've done with other leading countries. Similarly, for the time to obtain the VAT refund, if we can be consistent about 3 weeks, the 21 days, and of course the time to complete the income tax audits, that used to be quite, you know, long. And if SARS could put more efforts around that and reduce it to just 4 weeks, you know, South Africa can rank 14 in the world. And again, provided that the world does not move. Okay, so that brings me to the end, and over to you.